Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today we're looking at one of my true primary hybrids in the collection. So this one is called Phalaenopsis telu, and it's a cross between species lueddemanniana and Tetraspis. In this video, I'm going to share what I typically do to care for this orchid, and then we'll also look at its progress leading up to its blooms. So if we go back in time, this would be mid-May 2019. At that time, it had finished all its bloom, so it was just working on growing new leaves, and a new flower spike in October emerged. And it had already had 3 existing flower spike, and then in October 2019 it was actively growing a new flower spike, and that new flower spike actually was growing so well that the other 3 flower spike kind of looked like their progress was almost minimal to none. And then toward January 2020, this orchid started to retire one of its older leaves, and the speed of that leaves yellowing was extremely slow. So it's nothing to be concerned about. Orchids shed their leaves all the time, but if the leaves turn yellow in a matter of days, then that's when you need to really look and see if there is any problem with the root system or the overall health of the orchid. So mid-March timeframe 2020, this orchid was developing its one bud on its newest flower spike. The other flower spikes were also growing, elongating, but they weren't producing buds. And I have an idea, a thought about why this may be, but I will talk about that in a different video. So this orchid is a sequential bloomer. It actually sequentially bloomed last year, but this year it's only blooming on its new spike. And what you see in the background there is a clip that I use to hold this new flower spike on top of a leaf. The reason I did that was because, well, that new spike was growing pretty much right underneath a leaf, and I know as it progressed, as it grew longer, it wouldn't just come out on top of a leaf, and I really wanted to make sure that it's easy for me to see the flower, to take photos, to enjoy the flower in general. So I had to do something. But I didn't want to use a stick to prop up the flower spike because it was still pretty short. The flower spike was pretty short, and I didn't want to use anything that poke into the media because I didn't know. I was lazy, so I didn't want to look and see if I can avoid roots. But overall, I think it worked out well. As you can see here, this orchid flower is really waxy, and it's actually quite thick as well. It's very substantial. I really enjoyed this flower a lot. The fragrance is a bit sweet plus a bit of spiciness to it. So think of it as kind of like that cinnamony spiciness and citrusy flavor altogether. I think this orchid is cool because it has the characteristics of lueddemanniana that, petal, that the markings on the petals and sepals is a very much lueddemanniana look-alike, but its lip has that fuzzy lip, and that is something that's pretty unique to Tetraspis. So this cross actually has good distinctive characteristics from both parents. It's kind of a bummer that this orchid didn't produce as many blooms as I was hoping it would, given that it has 4 spikes, but only the newest one is producing a bud. And later in the video, and I'm gonna just tell you now, the new spike was also growing a new bud toward the end of the video. So if you see a later photo, you'll be able to see that. But this orchid is still in pretty good health, because you can see the latest leaf is rather big compared to all other ones. It's big, and it's also very long and wide as well. So this orchid obviously has a lot of aerial roots. I mean, I love looking at orchid roots, so the fact that it has these many aerial roots makes me giggle, or makes me stare at this orchid for quite some time every time I look at it. So this orchid is in semi-hydro, like I said earlier, and it already has roots reaching the bottom. So this gives me a great degree of flexibility to say, hey, if the weather is cooler, or if humidity is high, I don't need as much water in the container. I can choose to only give it 1/8 of a cup or up to 1/4 cup of water, and water goes down, right? So at the bottom, the roots at the bottom will be able to hydrate itself properly without me having to give it too much water and then try to dump out the water afterwards. And here is a bonus footage of the video. So the orchid today is the one on the left, and the orchids that I talked about in a different video is on the right. They have some overlap because, well, they always have very similar bloom schedule because of the parent lueddemanniana. So here is the view of them side by side, and I want to show you that today's main character, the telu on the left, is more red than the one on the right. The one on the right has more that pinkish tone, fuchsia tone to it. It's not as red as telu. But both of them have very similar smell, fragrance, except the one on the left has a bit more spiciness to it. And since we're talking about an orchid with lots of aerial roots, I might as well share this Q&A with you. A lot of my Chinese-speaking subscribers would ask me how to make orchids grow more aerial roots. And I said, well, it's never my goal to grow orchids just to make them grow roots. It's only when, for example, they're in stress, having problems, that I want to make them grow roots. But aerial roots always is just an added bonus for people who love to look at orchid roots like myself. But I think humidifier does help, because when I was living in New York, the environment usually was really dry, so I use humidifier all the time, and aerial roots grow a lot. And then in my last apartment, it was on the 3rd floor. Somehow humidity is just drier than the ground floor. I live on a ground floor now that I live in a house. So in that apartment, I also use a lot of humidifier just to keep the moisture up. But now I don't use it as much, and this year I noticed that while there are still aerial roots growth, but it's not as vigorous. Like overall, the vigor of aerial roots production is not as vigor, but they do still grow roots into the media quite a bit. So I think humidifier does play a part, but it's not something that we should strive for, because after all, you grow orchids, you want to look at the flowers for the most part, right? This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!